The lack of war between Ukraine and Russia will be broken in Crimea about the continued resistance to Russia's last war of conquest in 2022. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said that it started with Crimea. It will end with Crimea. Reclaiming the peninsula is perhaps Kiev's most ambitious war goal, extending to the Black Sea and bordering the Sea of Azov. On one side, Crimea is a vital piece of the regional strategic puzzle and key to protecting lucrative commercial shipping routes. But Ukraine will have to fight hard for such an award. Russian forces are reportedly preparing their approach from the peninsula and southern Ukraine for a counterattack in this direction. Smoke rose from the Kerch Bridge when the Russian Black Sea Fleet spyship was attacked by 3 drones at dawn last morning. An official from Crimea's Russian-backed administration said the Kerch Bridge, which connects the Crimean Peninsula to Russia's Krasnodar region, reopened on Wednesday after being closed for a few hours for drills. The Crimean bridge was closed due to the exercise in the region, said Sergei Aksionov, the head of Crimea annexed by Putin. Aksionov said that traffic will be back to normal in a few hours. I urge everyone to trust only reliable sources of information upon these statements of the Crimean official. The inhabitants of the peninsula were seriously worried because Crimea is a critical region that is constantly the scene of airstrikes. For this reason, the inhabitants of the peninsula accelerated their escape plans after Aksionov's statements, and even people selling their houses in Crimea appeared. The people of the peninsula do not want to live in a great chaos environment. In this regard, the Russian authorities are trying to appease the people in Crimea by hiding the existence of the danger. Moscow uses its own media powers for this because, as Russian media reported, that the smoke on the Crimean bridge was the result of a military exercise. But video footage posted on Telegram showed white smoke rising from the bridge's main central opening and more smoke rising from one of the crossing points in recent days. Russia has banned all trucks from the bridge, citing security concerns. When Putin's deputy prime minister announced the decision, the local radio station posted footage of him smoking on the Kerch Bridge on social media. This video circulating on social media shows a huge cloud of smoke rising from the Crimean bridge. They also shared photos and videos showing the dense smoke rising above the walkway. Vehicle queues to Russia were seen on the occupied peninsula. A drone attack on May 3 triggered a massive explosion at an oil depot near the bridge, raising suspicions that the Ukrainian armed forces might try to mount another attack. The Crimean bridge connects the Taman Peninsula in mainland Russia with a currently Russian-occupied Ukrainian Kerch Peninsula. A Russian official stated that an oil depot located near the strategically important Kerch Strait Bridge, which connects Russia with Crimea, burned down. Veniamin Kondratiev, governor of southern Russia's Krasnodar region, reported on his Telegram channel that an oil storage tank caught fire in the village of Volna, near the port of Taman, and the fire was classified as the highest severity. Volna is located near the Kerch Strait Bridge, Russia's only land link with the illegally annexed Crimean Peninsula and an important supply route for Russian forces amid the ongoing war in Ukraine. The latest fire came days after Russia blamed Ukraine for another fire at an oil depot in the Crimean port of Sevastopol. At that time, traffic on the Crimean bridge was temporarily stopped by the invaders due to the alleged threat of missile attack. These explosions on and around the Kerch Bridge come days after a former Ukrainian advisor said a Kiev counterattack would target the strategically vital Kerch Strait Bridge connecting Russia to Crimea. Alexei Aristovich, who served as an advisor to the Ukrainian presidency until he resigned earlier this year, suggested that one of the targets of Ukraine's counterattack could be an operation in the south of the country to try to separate the Russians from the land corridor leading to Crimea. Zelensky promised last summer to reverse Russia's 9-year illegal annexation of Crimea. In recent weeks, extensive fortifications have been spotted off the coast of Crimea, and the Russians have asked Topol naval base as Russia prepares for the Ukrainian advance. According to Aristovich, the Ukrainian armed forces will launch an attack on the Kerch Bridge, which is Russia's only land link with the annexed Crimean Peninsula. He said the Crimean Bridge would be the only supply channel for the peninsula if the Ukrainian troops succeed in closing the narrow isthmus that connects Crimea with the mainland of Ukraine, according to Arestovich. If the Ukrainian armed forces manage to destroy it, the peninsula will be left without help, Arestovich said. We will demolish the Crimean Bridge. All this is possible under certain conditions. We are currently adjusting the conditions, beginning with Ukraine's long-awaited spring counter-offensive, retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, formerly the commander of the U.S. Army Europe, laid out the key formations from which Kiev troops could capture Crimea. Mr. Hodges said there are various ways Ukrainians think about it. Obviously, they know the geography, the history, the weather. They know what the Russians are up to there. I think that they have near-perfect intelligence on what's going on in the Crimea. And I certainly hope we've helped. Kiev will not be able to secure commercial shipping in the Black Sea unless it liberates the peninsula. If the Russians continue to control Crimea because of some kind of peace treaty, Ukraine will never be able to rebuild its economy because Crimea blocks entry and exit to the Sea of Azov. What can Kiev do to mitigate the Russian threat from Crimea? Ben Hodges said you're going to isolate the peninsula first. When you look at the map, it starts to look more and more like a trap, perhaps a dead end for the Russians. And you can isolate it by cutting the land bridge first. The land bridge stretching from the southwestern Russian border west of Rostov-on-Don to occupied Donetsk, Mariupol, Berdyansk, Melitopol and the Dnieper River is Moscow's greatest achievement in more than a year of war. Russia's land corridor from south to east of Ukraine allows it to better supply the Crimean Peninsula, which is dependent on the Kerch Strait Bridge. A Ukrainian journey south from Zaporizhia and east from Kherson could endanger this vital corridor if Ukrainian forces can reach the threshold of Crimea. Many of the peninsula's most sensitive military and infrastructure targets will be in range. Ukrainian troops will have proven adept at using domestic technology as well as long-range Western munitions to target Russian command posts, troop concentrations, and supply centers. Crimea offers multiple targets, including the Sevastopol Naval Base and the Saki Air Base, both of which have already been attacked. Kiev will have to make a decision on what to do with the Kerch Strait Bridge, which was targeted by Ukrainians last year. The bridge was sensationally attacked last October, causing significant structural damage. This file aerial photograph taken on November 8, 2022, and published by the Russian Federal Highway Agency Razov, shows that the repair work on the damaged sections of the Kerch Bridge connecting Russia to Crimea hit by the explosion on October 8, 2022. Car and rail traffic stopped after the explosion on the Crimean Bridge, which damaged both lines in October 2022. The 12-mile road and rail bridge was damaged in an explosion last October in an attack that the Kremlin says was orchestrated by Ukrainian security forces. But Ukraine has not claimed responsibility. Crimea was annexed from Ukraine by Russia in 2014, but is internationally recognized as part of Ukraine. Ukraine had previously managed to attack a Russian warship. They had managed to hit Russia's flagship Moskva, and the ship then caught fire and sank. In April, pictures that emerged after the ship sank appeared to have been taken from a salvage ship next to the crashed Russian warship. There was damage to the left side of the ship, flames burning below deck, and a thick layer of black smoke rising into the sky. Moskva is shown leaning on the port side, low in the water, and apparently deployed lifeboats without any crew on board in sight. The rear helicopter door of the ship was also open. This indicated that the plane had taken official. It also looked like there was a fire truck behind the ship spraying water into the air. In summary, the clues that emerged later reveal that the Moscow administration actually hid some critical data from the press and its own people. But sooner or later, the truth comes out. Ukrainians also declare that they will eventually liberate Crimea, but Russia ignores this. Eastern European borderlines are currently among the most critical areas in the world, especially these days. The triangle of Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus is of vital importance for the foundation of ONU global order. But these border lines have witnessed some very hot clashes in recent days, while Russian President Vladimir Putin was losing his trusted friends like Turkey and Belarus. One by one, he became desperate when the shadow of the war hit Russian cities, and especially Moscow. Since Russia came up with the idea of deploying nuclear weapons and missile systems on Belarus's borders, critical attacks and mysterious explosions have occurred in many Russian cities, as well as along the border lines between Ukraine and Russia. In fact, these attacks and explosions showed us that this war had spread to Russia. And now that every Russian citizen felt the war in Ukraine at home, it was a sign that things had changed. Now, Russia was collectively shouting that the war in Ukraine should stop serial explosions and airstrikes in the Kremlin's front yard, less than 100 kilometers from Moscow, deeply worried the Kremlin residents. The attacks that took place in Russian cities with heavy losses of the Russian Navy and Army dragged the Russian people into a great panic. Both Russian soldiers and Russian citizens have come to plan how to flee the country and the army at every opportunity. In recent months, Vladimir Putin has ordered the installation of powerful air defense systems on the roofs of government buildings in cities such as Moscow and St. Petersburg. As it turns out, that wasn't enough. Last week, the Kremlin doubled the city air defenses with ONU decision. When we look at this critical situation in Russia from a much broader perspective, people living in the country, especially Moscow residents, are very worried about the drone attacks and explosions that have taken place in recent days. The Russian administration, on the other hand, is no longer likely to consider such situations as a problem, as we have mentioned, because the war has already spread to Russia and the Moscow administration is trying to hide the situation from its citizens. But right now, the situation in Russia is so critical that most of the citizens in the country are now faced with this important reality. Russians who understand the situation much more clearly state that they want to live in a safe Russia. Now anti-war protests are now a daily activity on the streets of Moscow. The Russian people are restless and do not feel safe. There are millions of Russian citizens who think that the source of this great concern is the reckless policies of the Putin regime and the senseless war it launched against Ukraine. Hundreds and thousands of them began to revolt even more after attacks on cities such as Moscow, St. Petersburg, Belgorod, Kursk, and Bryansk. The first events that triggered these rebellions were the entry of the Russian army into Ukraine on February 22nd. Afterwards, Putin's repressive policies and misguided propaganda kept the people in check. However, this lasted until September 22nd, with the mobilization decision. On September 22nd, more than 1 million Russian citizens fled the country. Thousands took to the streets and staged protests and riots. Nearly 100 recruitment centers and government buildings in more than 50 cities of the Russian Federation were set on fire. The city where the riots were most intense was again the capital, Moscow. However, the recent attacks in Russia are not on the agenda of the war strategies of the Russian leader Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin administration. At the moment, the only factor that the Russian administration is focusing on is an impromptu and violent attack on Ukraine. But a forgotten detail shows that Russia will turn into a hell in the coming days, just like the time of mobilization. Numerical data also prove this situation. According to a survey of many Russian citizens in Russia, about 87% want the war in Ukraine to end as soon as possible and Russia to withdraw its army from the Ukrainian territory. One of the biggest reasons for this is the cross-border offensive operations organized by the Ukrainian armed forces against Russia. With the increase in tension in the country, critical statements came from high-level Russian officials during the meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Deputy Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, Marat Kosnulin. In Moscow, it was announced that 3,700 residents of Belgorod Oblast were resettled due to the shelling of the Ukrainian armed forces. Kosnulin informed Putin that restoring the area would cost $134 million. Leader Vladimir Putin had to do something before things got too complicated in the country. There was a strong propaganda element in Vladimir Putin's discussion of the problems posed by Ukraine's cross-border attacks today. But as the clash continued, it was clear that Putin was very concerned about the security of Russia's border areas. Regardless if Ukraine took significant steps to recapture additional border areas, attacks would likely only escalate, and conventional artillery would become a huge problem for Russia as well. And it became feared for the Russians. About 400 kilometers from the Ukrainian border in the Russian city of Tula, a terrible explosion occurred. Residents did not consider the possibility that this explosion would be an attack from Ukraine because the distance was too much. However, there was a forgotten detail that the Ukrainian armed forces could attack even Russian cities at a distance of more than 400 kilometers by using unmanned aerial vehicles. Shortly after the explosion, it was revealed that this attack was caused by a large drone. In fact, the size of the UAV and the severity of the impact were so great that a total of 12 residents in Kirovsk were heavily damaged as a result of this striking attack. The drone attack covered an area of 200 meters squared in total in the Kirovsk region. That's about 2 football fields long. Having such a large area to influence brought a critical question to mind: did the Ukrainians start using Soviet Aerojet-powered drones again on the same day of the attack? The Ukrainians used a Soviet Aerojet-powered UAV equipped with a FAB-100, 120 high-explosive aerial bomb. According to the results of the Russian authorities' investigations, that is why the scale of the attack was felt so strongly. It was also claimed that 3 people were seriously injured as a result of the drone attack in Tula. The first images from the explosion site clearly showed the destruction in Kirovsk. On the other hand, it is known that Kirovsk was not the ultimate target of the Ukrainian army's attack. If the UAV had advanced a little further, it is thought that the target could be military resources located in or around the capital, Moscow. The distance between the 2 city borders is about 100 kilometers. For this reason, even the possibility of Moscow being a target may cause all balances to change. The size of the drone attack in Tula is therefore critical. But according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, the drone crashed due to its impact on electronic warfare navigation systems. According to Russian officials, the Pol-21 electronic warfare system in the city of Tula was activated, and further progress of the drone was barely prevented after the striking drone attack. Tensions in Russia escalated significantly. This fiasco was not the first drone attack in Russia, and it won't be the last, because just a few days before these attacks, a critical situation had occurred again in Tula. It was reported that the 600-kilometer range Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicle crashed near Thul. You can easily see that the drone has a very large size in the photos of the drone that fell in the Odoyevsky district of the Tula region. In addition, the detail that this drone apparently does not carry explosives. It is already the same with almost all the features of the Iranian Shahed-131 UAV was quite remarkable. According to the studios of the Russian authorities, it is claimed that the UAV, which crashed in the Odoyevsky district, traveled approximately 250 kilometers. Actually, this is quite possible, and even the Ukrainian army has drones that can go much further than this range. Also, the use of unmanned aerial vehicles by the Ukrainian armed forces for attacks on Russian territory creates quite a few problems, since such UAVs can fly at low altitudes, thereby bypassing air defense deployment areas. The latest attack in Russia and allegations of resettlement were shared with the press a day after it was reported that a $2 billion military aid package planned for Ukraine is expected to include the first supply of the GLSD, the small-diameter launched bomb. These time intervals were also quite remarkable. In fact, to see what's really going on in Russia, we have to consider another critical area: The place we're talking about is the Crimean Peninsula. This peninsula, one of the most strategic areas of the war, is under Russia's control. But the Ukrainian armed forces has completely blockaded this area with drone attacks. In short, in order to win this war and eliminate this dangerous situation in Eastern Europe, the Ukrainians are carrying out active drone attacks and victory operations, both in the cities, within the borders of Russia, and in the Crimean Peninsula, which is the most important region for Russia.